Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation, week 7 presentation. I'm Mark Viglione. This week I'm doing a presentation on David Rier's article, Publication Visibility of Sensitive Public Health Data When Scientists Bury Their Results. And it was actually quite an interesting article that we'll go through here. And basically the gist of the article was the work of American toxic exposure epidemiologists that can attract media coverage and lead the public to change health practices. So this paper was also a study from 61 interviews with U.S. toxic exposure epidemiologists on whether such possibilities shape their selection of journals for potentially sensitive papers. And we start out with the scientist. A long tradition prizes neutral objectivity from scientists. And now an opposing tradition acknowledges scientific accountability for societal consequences, which is becoming more accepted. And going further with this, throughout history, numerous scientists have tried to manage repercussions of their work. Leo Szilard tried to prevent the use against civilians of the atomic bomb he helped develop. Norman Weiner denied a defense contractor access to some of his research bearing on missile development. Did not want military involvement to actually fall, and some of his research to fall into the wrong hands. Nancy Wexler carefully controlled the amount of information about personal carrier and disease status to close to subjects when doing studies of genetics of the Huntington's disease. Rier's research deals with the visibility of sensitive public health data, especially those liable to attract media and public attention. So we're taking a look at the concept of scientific openness. And the reputation of a journal and how wide an audience the journal attracts. This goes into why do scientists choose a particular journal and for what grounds. The reputation of a journal and how wide an audience the journal attracts. Through upcoming interviews with epidemiologists in this study, we'll see how the above concepts are interchangeable and that scientists will normally prefer prestigious outlets. And that these concepts will be interchangeable because of the reputation of the journal and also how wide the audience the journal attracts will later come up as burial and bullhorn camps. So why is this the case? Well, prestigious journals, which are more visible, can be vital for securing tenure and grants, and this can benefit a scientist's career. So this actually does start posing the ethical questions of, would a scientist just deliberately choose a journal because he knows that it will be more visible and thus benefit his career more? Or will he be able to secure a tenure at his university or grants? This is something that we like to try to look at further going forward. So epidemiology data is frequently difficult to interpret. Journalists, particularly those who are not full-time science reporters, are seldom familiar with the intricacies of these methods and can often exaggerate the risks because of the needs to catch the public eye or to get an actual interesting article out that will get a lot of visibility themselves. And this adds to the previous week's reading where we were discussing how journalists and scientists and the public, how the public views science and scientists, and how there's a lack of knowledge really related to the scientists and then pseudoscientists. So we are getting some of the previous week's readings in this week's, and some of these contests are going forward each week. So where should scientists submit papers? Can submitting papers to lesser known journals affect career goals? Well, obviously the quick answer to that would be yes. Also, keeping significant public health information from those affected, another ethical concern. So you have, can submitting papers to lesser known journals affect career goals? Well, that is true. And can it keep significant public health information from those affected? And that also can happen too. if not choosing a journal that is highly visible or well known. So actually, midway through the paper, Rier's study and the methods and data, this is actually some very interesting stuff. So 61 interviews were conducted with epidemiologists between 1992 and 1994. These were U.S.-based toxic exposure epidemiologists. Now, the first 18 selected for the participation in major controversies over visibility and timing of published data. So once again, the first 18 were selected for the participation in major controversies over visibility and timing of published data. So in other words, these 18 either had a study with a major controversy and highly visible, and timing of this was published data in a journal. So the next 31 were selected from having published studies liable to attract media and public attention because they reported a new or surprising risk. So the next 31 were selected from having published studies liable to attract media, public attention because they reported a new or surprising risk. So here are the controversy stuff starts to come up. Here that concept, the societal consequences, starts to come up in the study. And now the final 12 met equivalent criteria because they were chosen on a snowball style. Now, snowball style is a type of sampling done in research studies, which this would probably be, so you see where there was the next 31 in the middle there. Of those 31s, their acquaintances were probably chosen for those final 12, and this creates a bit of a rolling fashion in the study. So then those 12 would know another 12, and those 12 would know another 14, and another 14 would know another 20. And so you see how a snowball style of sampling in a study would work. So that's basically what they're getting at with the concept of a snowball style. So of the 61, 38 were from universities, 19 were from various government settings, and 11 were from federal, and 4 were from private settings. 42 were male, and 19 were female. How they decided where to submit toxic exposure studies. That was one of the questions they were asked as part of the study. And how they would select a journal based on a hot paper versus one that did not have the likelihood of getting a high amount of media attention or any media attention at all. So those two questions were asked as part of the study to these 61. How they decided where to submit toxic exposure studies, and how they would select a journal based on a hot paper, which would have a high visibility or have a high concept of societal consequences versus one that did not have the likelihood of high media attention. So the results came through. 13 of the 61 said that they either had or would bury a study in a less visible journal as a way to handle societal consequences. 9 of the 61 said they'd either had or would suppress sensitive data altogether. And 22 of the 61 said they either had or would practice burial of data. So you see where the ethical concerns comes up because of at least a certain amount of percentage of people that are scientists that either are or have, they would actually bury it because they would want it to not get the attention. So you see where the health concerns could come out if this was actually health data that was very important for the public to know. And these scientists are either saying they have or would suppress the data altogether just to shield themselves from societal consequences. So we go into further. Rier actually talks about the concept of a journal as a bullhorn. And metaphorically speaking, really, is what this is. Journals are devices to transmit their research to the largest relevant audience. And here's a quote from one of the people that were interviewed, one of the scientists that were interviewed. That person says, "You want people to read your work, and you want it to matter. So that means getting it to a better journal." So you can see where these influences are affecting how scientific data gets out to the public. So he also talks about a concept of a journal as a burial ground. So this is using a journal to narrowcast their findings to the scientific community, avoiding media and the public. So you have two contrasts here, using it as a bullhorn, getting it out there, wanting people to know, and then also using it as a burial ground, narrowcasting and trying to avoid the media and the public. And a quote from one of the scientists interviewed for as far as seeing the journal as a burial ground: there are some papers that are better not heavily publicized in order to avoid having them misused or to get a lot of publicity or the wrong kind. So this is also just a concept of burying these results, or like choosing a journal that is overseas, like a British journal or something of that nature, to avoid having that data misused or getting a lot of publicity of the wrong kind. The media has a tendency of spinning certain issues that happen in health, and this actually could just attract some wrong type of attention to that scientist. So does burial actually work? Now, burial in terms of actually burying this data in a journal. So what the synopsis I took out of this portion of the Rier article was: all who have interviewed seem to agree that highly technical specialized journals serviced as good burial grounds. However, burial and bullhorn concepts among those who were interviewed seem to be interchangeable in regards to visibility. So in other words, one person could say, I would bury this data in this journal, where another person, another scientist would say, well, I would use that journal as a bullhorn. And the example made in the article was the Journal of National Cancer Institute. And that was a journal that was used as far as cancer results research. They were either buried there they didn't want to be found, or they was accentuated there. And of the people that were interviewed, they chose those particular journals to either bury or use them as a bullhorn. So the discussion in this study, that is, most epidemiologists in this sample, when preparing to publish potentially sensitive data, would usually select the most visible journal as possible. So that was expected. That was the expected result. Up to 46% have or would bury the data in a less visible journal, so to avoid unwanted or attention beyond the scientific community, or not published at all. So this was a little bit troublesome. Of those who interviewed, 46% have or would bury the data in a less visible journal, so to avoid unwanted attention beyond the scientific community, or to not publish it at all, deal to that concept of societal consequences. So that's what we're looking at in this study with Rier. So two conclusions were gathered from this. The first is, though observers have questioned the extent to which openness is actually a central value of scientists, this study displayed strong support for openness, saw it as preserving the ability to publish. So here, despite those results, the central value of scientists, this study actually displayed a strong support for actual scientific openness. And they saw it as preserving the ability to publish. Rier explained this in our article. And the second conclusion is, when discussing the journal selection, epidemiologists in both burial and bullhorn camps often explain their decisions in terms of social responsibility. So it's those terms of social consequences and social responsibility was the reason why a certain journal was selected, and not because of the actual study itself or the actual data. So those were two interesting conclusions that were made. And that concludes my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks.